Welcome everyone. So Half-Life Alyx has finally and officially released, and I can't help but feel kind of broken up over it, or maybe that's not even the right term, feel like I'm almost let down by the experience somewhat, mainly because there are a couple of different caveats to the game that you'll kind of see as we're exploring it together. And one of them is that while Valve has built out this absolutely gorgeous environment that you see before you here, unfortunately they end up spending very little time having the player actually explore the city ruins of 17 or City 17. Rather, you spend quite a bit of time kind of trudging along tiny hallways, fighting zombies, and not really getting to explore what's really on offer here on this graphical powerhouse of a game, which looks, as you can see, just absolutely stunning when you're actually out in the sunlight and getting to see the really nostalgic architecture of City 17 as you might remember it if you played Half-Life back in 2004. It's just absolutely mind-boggling that the game looks this great. And, when you look around, you really get to take in what they've created here because the art direction is absolutely phenomenal here. And you can't take that away. But unfortunately, areas like this where you can see, clearly cloth effects in the game don't really seem to be exhibited anywhere else. And the only way to get to this location is if you kind of hack your way up there basically by, using whatever spots available to you. And you can see even far away there's cloth effects happening, and yet this is exhibited nowhere else in the title except on this one particular building. And again, the only way to get there is to basically kind of hack your way up the walls and hope for the best. And yet these are some of the most beautiful looking locations in the title overall. As you can see, the stunning views from here are just absolutely exhilarating, and there's just really no other place where you'll be able to find something like this because you're going to be spending so much time underground in this title, which is a real shame considering what they've created here, because once again you can see here that there's a lot on display, a lot of great particle effects. It's just absolutely gorgeous. You can see the detail everywhere. The skybox is just absolutely phenomenal, which looks incredible as well. And then you go over there and you see some kind of 2D buildings. Like, what is that in 2020? And specifically when juxtaposed against the right side of the map here, where you can see a lot of 3D buildings, it just looks completely out of place. And that ruins the experience a lot of ways because you're taken out of it. And here, you can kind of see the areas where you will end up spending a lot of time, especially a lot of time in the dark, with a flashlight mechanic that, honestly, if I were to give it a rating out of all the VR games, it would have to be a 2 out of 10, just because the flashlight seems to do whatever it wants. Sometimes it'll shine, straight ahead as you're pointing it, other times it'll shine off to the side, and you're going to see that it's really difficult to kind of get your bearings in places like this. And I can see why Valve did this. They really wanted you to have a hectic experience because you feel walled in, and it does give you some old Half-Life 2 vibes in these sections, especially because, again, of the exploding barrels that you're able to utilize against your enemies, which of course make a comeback. But at the same time, the kind of pacing they've gone for here to try and add frenetic kind of fights into the game don't necessarily always work because you aren't really able to backtrack away from the enemies in these snaking hallways, which makes for more of a frustrating experience than it does for a fun one. And while it's definitely kind of leveled out by the fun gunplay in this game, a lot of times you'll see, especially in these dark sections, you're going to be fumbling for reloads. And while, again, that most likely was Valve's intention here, you can't help but feel that if these sections had opened up just a little bit more, you'd be having a lot more fun, and potentially there could be a lot more enemies on screen. And therein lies one of my problems with the game, is that they've really tried to slow down the pacing to make it much more easy for VR newcomers. So as someone who's a VR veteran and having played these original Half-Life 2 on the Oculus way back when, in 2013, when that was kind of initially released, this definitely feels like a letdown because of the pacing and because of the fact that you're stuck in these really tiny maps a lot of the time, and for really the majority of the title, where all you're really doing is shooting 1 or 2 zombies at a time. And while they do have some new moves, and while typically they'll try to throw a lot more of them and also mix in the head crabs as well, you will find that there aren't really a whole lot of things going on with these sections. You're not getting jump scares. you're not really getting a whole lot of involvement with the zombies. And because of the fact that there's no melee system built into this game, you feel like your only option is guns and scavenging for ammo, which again is kind of a strange design choice to me, because you would figure that with how much the crowbar had had an impact in Gordon's story, you would think that Alyx would have some more moves, especially considering in Half-Life 2 she was able to take on the Combine all by herself in what appeared to be, basically just a bunch of punches and kicks. And yet you have nothing of the sort here. You aren't able to grab hold of a zombie like you can of a head crab, mid-air or mid-swing and stop them so that you can use your arsenal of kicks and punches to potentially throw them off of you. Instead, you're stuck, using your shotgun, pistol, or SMG, depending on, what level in the game you're at, and using the barrels to your advantage, but shooting down something like an obstacle from up top to have it come down, on the zombie, or whatever enemies you have, is not really a feature that they've implemented here. Despite the fact that so many objects in the game have physics, you can't just throw them at the zombie and cause massive damage, even though the zombies themselves are able to do it to you, which really feels like a missed opportunity to me. And I feel like there's going to be a theme for this review, is that there's just so many opportunities to have done things differently with this title, yet Valve opted for a really simplified version, specifically focusing mainly on the guns and on the mechanics of scavenging around the level. And again, it seems like an odd omission to not have melee when you do, kind of swing so many objects in this game and pull them towards you. You would think that pulling a pipe or, a plank that you just destroyed towards you and then using it to ward off your enemies or throwing it back in their face would make sense. But it seems that their explanation is that the gravity gloves are simply not really strong enough to throw objects around. And when Valve specifically talked about the issue of melee, they seem to have said that, for them, having a melee mechanic without having haptic feedback didn't really make a whole lot of sense, which seems to me more like a lazy design decision than it does an actual move to make a fun gameplay type for the player, but I digress. This just seems to be something they opted for instead of actually being able to implement such a system. And I can see where they're coming from, but it definitely feels like a strange kind of drop to have, especially when titles such as Boneworks have implemented this quite well, and it works great in other titles as well. Now, something that I did like is that the Combine specifically, they look a lot like their former selves, but now with a lot of added detail, and you can see that, when you move them around, things kind of swing around and jiggle, which is really great, but the problem is there seems to be a lot of clipping. You can see when my hands are placed on the body that my fingers will disappear into the body, and a lot of times it just looks off and out of place in the game where you interact with the world so much. It just seems like, why would you do this in a game that's in 2020? And even though you can really grope these guys, I don't necessarily recommend it, because it's not really going to get you anywhere with the Combine. Now, something that I did notice is that the physics system can be kind of all over the place. For example, take, moving some of these barrels, you have to get really close to it to really be able to interact with the barrel, which, means a lot of crouching. You can't necessarily pull it towards you because they've added a weight to these objects. And you can see here, as soon as I try and drag the zombie body, it won't let me do it even with two hands just because his elbow is stuck on something and he's really heavy, which, again, just seems really strange. Now, the cool thing is that the gravity gloves are really useful for pulling things like, resin and hats onto your head, and yes, hats do make a return here, although you don't have to pay for them this time, unlike in TF2. But taking, for example, this massive traffic cone here, it seems to be quite movable, despite the fact that it probably weighs almost half as much as that zombie, but you have to, once again, really get close to it, and if you do that, sometimes the physics take over and they'll put you on top of the cone even though you clip through a lot of other objects in the game. So you have to crouch down and methodically move the thing until you're actually able to grab it, and sometimes my tracking would even fail next to this object just to try and get it down a certain path. So sometimes these inconsistencies really take you out of the experience, which is otherwise really incredible, because you just get to interact with so many cans and glasses and all kinds of different things in the world. But this brings me back again to the interactivity of the game, which is that you can grab a plank and you can move corpses around, and that works really well. But all of a sudden, if you were to take that same plank and you were to try and do the same thing with a zombie, it just doesn't work. None of that interaction is there. They won't even flinch when you try and kind of push an object into their face. Sometimes it'll just go right through them. And again, you can see this here, like they have so much interactivity, with a corpse, for example, as morbid as that may sound, and yet sometimes things still kind of clip through. But by and large, you can see that a lot of stuff still moves. A lot of it is interactive, and you can really get up close, and you can move things around, and you can grasp the various parts of the body, and it looks amazing, and it just works really great. But again, it feels like, for me, that they should have done a lot more of this with a live enemy, because you're actually able to do so much, here, but yet when you try and do the same thing once they're up in your face and they're still living, then you just simply can't do it anymore. And it feels like that's something that would have been so easy to implement because the system is already there, yet for some reason it isn't. And that takes away from the experience again, because when you have so many objects that you can use and these physics with a corpse, why doesn't it work when you have a living combine or a living zombie? And then the combat itself seems to be just all over the place. From time to time, you'll work against the zombie, and sometimes, you're in an open environment such as this, and they'll follow you along to a certain extent, but then for some reason, all of a sudden, they don't do anything. Now, in this case, I shot one of the bulbs in the zombie's arms, and that instantly kills them, but other times, it's just a complete waste of ammo, and you're better off going for the head. Now, the scavenging mechanics come into effect here, and you're going to have to be doing this a lot during combat, which can both be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. But for the most part, because the gravity gloves work really well, and because you're able to clasp objects really easily, you're going to have a good time with this. But as you can see, there are still sections where, even though it's wide open, they're not really throwing a whole lot of enemies at you. And so the combat will range from being really slow and tactical to being very hectic from time to time, depending on the location and the size of the world that you happen to be in at that particular point in time. And as you can see here, they'll hide some head crabs in areas that would otherwise, be kind of inaccessible to you until you kind of complete some sort of puzzle, etc. But the enemy AI is inconsistent as all hell in this game, and it really doesn't make sense to me why. It's rather perplexing. Some zombies will follow you, some won't. Some will actually end up throwing objects at you at different times, depending how close you are to the zombie, or depending on what sort of attacks have you used against it so far. So for example, in here you can see the zombie was able to throw a box at me, which was pretty interesting, but at the same time it didn't throw any other objects my way, despite the fact that it had multiple opportunities to do so. And you can see here that I've made my way down these steps, but the zombie refuses to follow me, despite the fact that I've made a whole lot of noise, and generally have attracted my way towards it. And it seems to still not really want to take any kind of measures against me. Now, if I recall correctly, in Half-Life 2, sometimes the zombies would stumble a little bit faster towards you when you were trying to make your escape from them. But here, despite the fact that the Combine AI will a lot of times just outflank you, in my experience, the zombies seem to be quite dumb. And even though in this game they seem to try and humanize them a lot more by making them moan and kind of bash their heads against stuff, which kind of makes the zombies seem a lot more human than they were in the previous games, at the same time they seem to exhibit qualities of stupidity that just are out of place in the game in 2020. The AI feels like it's been almost specifically dumbed down for reasons that are beyond my understanding. And you can see here that the zombie had multiple chances to also get up and potentially even scare me as a player, but this wasn't really taken advantage of until I got really close to it. And here, despite me being a lot further away from this zombie, it manages to hit me with a box while the other one missed, twice at least, and never even took advantage of the objects that were next to it. And typically speaking, I'd be okay with forgiving something like this, except that this particular zombie here actually decides to follow me all the way down the steps, unlike the other one before it. And it's not as if they're a different type of zombie, it's really the same class, or what I would consider to be the same class, and yet this one seems to have a little bit more brains, and seems to actually take more interest in me following me all the way down the steps and actually attacking in multiple sections, even though the other one did no such thing whatsoever. And this just adds to the strange kind of inconsistencies that you'll see throughout the AI, for the most part in all of the game. Some zombies will exhibit brains and some are just completely stupid and will oftentimes just stand in the corner waiting for you to get really close as if it was just done by design or to make the game a lot easier, and this seems to propagate across the various difficulty settings in the game as well. And a lot of times there's inconsistency with the head crabs, the chance of them actually attacking you after the zombie that you downed has indeed expired, so this seems to just be kind of all over the place as well. Now, the typical gunplay here that's on show is a lot of fun. I mean, you're going to have a great time firing the guns. You're going to have the guns feel really good because the audio work on them is fantastic. And the sections where you're actually working against the Combine are just a blast to play, especially when you're actually outside, because they're fairly accurate. They'll do a good job of suppressing you when it needs to be done. And again, they'll actually be kind of a threat, especially earlier on when all you really have is your pistol, and especially if you haven't bought the actual optical sights yet, it's going to be a tough challenge aiming all the way down sights, because that's something you do have to do in VR to get those headshots. Now later on you can acquire the laser sight, which makes it a lot easier, but I would almost go ahead and say that the laser sight just makes the game far too easy at that point, because you'll be getting headshots pretty much left and right, unless you're using something like Windows mixed reality controllers where you're going to have a hard time kind of holding it steady in front of your face, which is one of those things that I noticed on the Samsung Odyssey in particular, but I would imagine that that's an issue that goes across multiple other Windows mixed reality headsets. And something else is that you'll be checking your guns and your ammo quite frequently throughout, and scavenging for the ammunition and clips specifically throughout the various firefights that you're going to be in this title. And again, these sort of more opened up sections are going to be a lot more fun than the zombie sections, at least to me, just because you're actually out in City 17 as opposed to trudging along in some sewer somewhere unable to actually see anything. But there are times, such as this section here, where you are in the underground section, although it is a little bit more open. However, just because of the fact that you really can't have too many places to go, for the most part you're going to be shooting in a straight line, as will the enemies, you're going to spend quite a bit of time throwing grenades, at least in my experience, just because there's not a whole lot that you can do here, and the health bar will get drained, especially by the Combine Heavies, which we'll see in a moment here, because ultimately you don't have a shield that you can protect yourself with, and they seem to shoot past pretty much everything. Now there are sections in these kind of more enclosed spaces where you will have to be a little bit more slow and methodical with your shot placement, and you're not going to want to be able to really kind of expose yourself, because there's not a whole lot of cover aside from these corners, and the AI will do a really good job of hitting you in the face or in the shoulders in here, just because again there's not a whole lot of places for you to go. You can't really backtrack, and so you're going to be kind of stuck playing by their rules, and they will push up on you and ultimately kind of face you square on, which again, adds to the tension, but at the same time can make it kind of a frustrating experience unless you decide to teleport everywhere. I have decided to kind of stick to mostly using, free locomotion, using the thumbstick, and that seems to make the firefights at least a little bit more engaging and a little bit more fun, even when, during moments like this, my gun just decides to randomly jam up on me, which seems to be, kind of a common sight, even with the index controllers. For one reason or another, it seems to be a glitch within the game, which again just kind of stems from the fact that they haven't really ironed out all the kinks in this title in particular, which just makes it, a little bit of a frustrating experience at times, but for the most part the guns work out really well. You're going to have a fun time reloading them, and you're going to have no issues aiming, really, again, unless you have some of those sort of weaker VR systems that don't really do as well with track controllers when you're placing guns next to your face. I haven't had the chance to play it on the Oculus, but I would imagine that since the Oculus has fixed their localized tracking, especially for aiming down sights for other titles, then this shouldn't be an issue in Half-Life Alyx either. And that means that you're going to have a fun time playing this game across just a multitude of different VR headsets. But that's kind of, where I take a lot of the issue with some of the gunfights in the games, because, again, there's a lot of inconsistency. And while I would generally say that for, again, someone who's a newcomer to VR, you're going to have a great time here, you're going to have a lot of fun gunplay, and for those of us who are, sort of veterans of the series, being back in City 17 and facing down some of the same enemies, harks back to all those fun times that we had in Half-Life Deathmatch and even in the campaign for Half-Life 2 and specifically the episodes, but unfortunately the story really doesn't do a great job of expanding a whole lot on Alyx's character, and you ultimately don't really feel as connected to her as you would have during Half-Life 2, which again seems like a misstep considering the writing is for the most part really good. Now, the voice actor for Alyx is also not really the best, but that's a story for another time. Ultimately, I feel like if you're somebody new to VR, this game is going to be a solid 9 out of 10 for you, whereas if you're somebody who's a veteran, you're looking at more like a 7.5, as the title really doesn't do anything new that hasn't been tread on in past titles.